There is a specific chilling moment in an empath's life where the noise simply stops. It is not a sudden mental breakdown or a temporary state of burnout. It is a profound, permanent breaking point. While the world might look at you and mistake this silence for depression or withdrawal, Carl Jung understood it as something far more significant. He recognized it as the final, necessary stage of spiritual awakening. When you finally stop trying to fix the chaos of the people around you, you aren't becoming heartless or cruel. You are becoming untouchable. You are stepping out of the line of fire and reclaiming a version of yourself that can no longer be used, manipulated, or drained. To understand how you reach this point, you have to look at your original role, the emotional shock absorber. From a very young age, you were the person who walked into a room and immediately felt the temperature of the environment. You didn't just hear what people said, you felt the weight of their unspoken anxieties, their hidden frustrations, and their simmering tensions. While everyone else walked through life oblivious to the emotional currents around them, your nervous system was wide open, acting like a sponge that soaked up everything. You didn't choose to be this way, it was simply how you functioned, constantly balancing the heavy energy of your family, your partner, and your friends, so they wouldn't have to deal with it themselves. You were likely told this was your quote-unquote gift, but in reality, it was your trap. Growing up, you were constantly rewarded for being the quote-unquote mature one or the quote-unquote understanding child. Every time you suppressed your own voice to keep the peace, you were praised. Every time you absorbed a parent's anger or a friend's drama so they could feel better, you were validated for your sacrifice. This conditioning taught you that your value was tied to how much you could absorb and how little you complained. You learned to bury your own needs under layers of service, believing that being a good person meant being a martyr. You didn't realize it then, but you were being trained to prioritize everyone else's comfort while slowly erasing your own. This dynamic made you the ultimate target for those who refused to take responsibility for their own lives. Your partners, your siblings, and your colleagues learned that they didn't need to regulate their own emotions because you were always there to do it for them. If they were chaotic, you smoothed things over. If they were dishonest, you rationalized their behavior. If they were cruel, you found a way to empathize with their hidden pain. You became their free therapist, their emotional crutch, and their dumping ground, all while wearing your exhaustion like a badge of honor. You kept this up until the day the weight of it all became too heavy to carry. And that is exactly when the silence finally began. While you were busy playing the role of the peacemaker, your unconscious mind was operating like a high-level surveillance system. You might think that because you were so forgiving, you were oblivious to what was happening, but the truth is the exact opposite. Your psyche has been meticulously cataloging every single interaction for years. It recorded the subtle gaslighting in the morning, the shifting tone of voice when a lie was being told, and the precise moment someone took advantage of your kindness. You have been holding on to an extensive, detailed archive of every betrayal, every manipulation, and every time someone treated you like an option rather than a human being. For a long time, you knew exactly what was going on. You understood the specific emotional triggers your parents used to make you feel guilty. You knew the exact sequence of lies your partner relied on to hide their infidelity. You were intimately familiar with the patterns your friends used whenever they needed something from you. You held all this information, possessing a map of their dysfunction that was accurate enough to expose them at any moment, yet you never did. You chose to keep the peace. You chose to suppress your own knowledge because you were terrified that using it would make you just as toxic as they were. You continued to offer grace when none was deserved, hoping that if you loved them enough, they might eventually choose to be honest. You kept giving and giving even when the signs were screaming at you to stop. You stayed in the game, ignoring the red flags, and dismissing your own gut feelings as paranoia or overthinking. You did this because you were protecting the fantasy you had built, the idea that if you were just patient enough, they would finally become the person you knew they were capable of being. You sacrificed your own reality to maintain their illusion of normalcy. You essentially participated in your own exploitation, silencing your inner voice so that their narrative could remain undisturbed. The turning point isn't just about what they did to you, it is about the moment you finally confront what you did to yourself. That snap you feel is the sound of the fantasy shattering. It happens the second you realize that you didn't miss the signs, you actively chose to ignore them. You realize that you betrayed your own boundaries to accommodate people who never had your best interests at heart. That realization cuts deeper than any external lie ever could. It is the painful, sobering recognition that you were the one who allowed the violation to continue. In that instant, the resentment you suppressed for years finally has nowhere left to hide. You stop blaming them for being who they are and start acknowledging that you are the one responsible for the access you granted them. The archive you kept is no longer a secret burden. It becomes the cold, hard evidence you need to finally walk away. You aren't just leaving a person or a situation. You are leaving behind the version of yourself who thought that your worth was measured by how much pain you could endure. When you stop protecting their fantasy, the entire structure of their influence over you collapses, and you are finally left with the only thing that matters, the truth of your own experience. The withdrawal of projections is the exact moment the spell breaks, and it is perhaps the most disorienting yet liberating experience you will ever have. For years, you lived in a state of self-imposed blindness, projectively mapping virtues onto people who simply did not possess them. You saw them not as they were, but as who you desperately needed them to be to make your sacrifices worth it. You projected your own capacity for loyalty, your own integrity, and your own deep well of compassion onto them, hoping that if you gave them enough of yourself, it would eventually ignite that same goodness within them. You were essentially decorating an empty house, waiting for someone to move in who was never actually there. When you finally withdraw those projections, the fog that has clouded your judgment for years instantly lifts. It is jarring, like waking up from a dream and finding yourself in a completely different room. You are no longer looking at your partner, parent, or friend through the lens of your own hopes and potential. You are looking at them through the cold, clear lens of reality. You see the manipulation for what it is, not for what you tried to excuse it as. You see the selfishness, the lack of empathy, and the patterns of betrayal. And for the first time, you don't feel the urge to fix or reframe their behavior. You are no longer trying to bridge the gap between their actions and your expectations. You are simply witnessing them, exactly as they are, without the filter of your desperate need for them to be better. This shift changes everything about how you communicate. You stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop justifying your boundaries to people who have no intention of respecting them. You stop apologizing for taking up space or for finally speaking the truth. You don't need to have dramatic confrontations or heated arguments to prove a point anymore, because you no longer care if they understand. The need for their validation, which once felt like air, now feels like a weight you are finally setting down. You realize that winning an argument with a narcissist or a manipulator was a game you were never going to win, and you stop playing entirely. By opting out, you are fundamentally disrupting the system that relied on your silence. Those around you will inevitably notice the change, and they will likely label you as dramatic, cold, or changed to try and force you back into your old compliant role. Do not let these labels confuse you. You are not becoming the problem. You are simply refusing to be the solution to someone else's dysfunction. You are no longer the emotional shock absorber, the mediator, or the infinite resource. You have realized that your empathy is a resource, and you are reclaiming the power to choose who is worthy of that investment. This withdrawal isn't a rejection of love, it is a rejection of exploitation. It is the moment you move from being a participant in a cycle of self-betrayal to being a sovereign individual who decides the terms of their own life. When you stop projecting your goodness onto those who don't deserve it, you free up an incredible amount of internal energy. You aren't losing anything. You are finally gathering your scattered energy back into yourself. You are no longer trying to change the world around you, and in doing so, you have finally found the clarity to change yourself. When you finally step away from the role of the perpetual caretaker, the people who relied on your labor will almost immediately label you as selfish. They will weaponize this word, hoping to trigger the deep-seated guilt they know lives inside you. They want you to believe that if you aren't sacrificing your mental health, your time, and your boundaries for them, you have somehow become a bad person. You must understand that this accusation is not a reflection of your character. It is a desperate reaction from people who have lost their free resource. What they call selfishness is actually the healthiest thing you will ever experience. Your shadow self finally coming online to defend your borders. In Jungian psychology, the shadow consists of the traits we have been conditioned to suppress, hide, or deny because society told us they were unacceptable. For an empath, the shadow includes the ability to say no, the capacity to prioritize one's own needs, and the refusal to be a victim. You were taught that these traits were dangerous or mean, but in reality, they are your psychological immune system. This shadow is your survival instinct, and it has been dormant for years, waiting for you to realize that you are allowed to exist for your own sake. When you integrate this part of yourself, you aren't becoming a new person. You are finally becoming a complete one. You are not losing your empathy. You are simply ending the era of indiscriminate, reckless generosity. For a long time, you were a leaky container, pouring your life force into every person you encountered, regardless of whether they were pouring anything back into you. You were essentially feeding energy vampires who thrived on your lack of boundaries. By integrating your shadow, you are plugging those leaks. You are learning that empathy, while beautiful, is a limited resource that should be treated as sacred. You stop wasting your precious time on people who would never dream of doing the same for you, and you start redirecting that energy toward your own growth, your own peace, and your own goals. This shift is often misidentified as coldness by outsiders, but there is a world of difference between being cold and being sovereign. Being cold implies an absence of feeling. Being sovereign implies the presence of authority over your own internal world. You can still feel deeply, you can still be compassionate, and you can still be kind, but you are now the one who holds the gate key. You no longer allow access to anyone who hasn't proven they are worthy of your trust. You are no longer performing for an audience that never appreciated the show. You are living for yourself. When you protect your peace, you are not closing yourself off from the world. You are simply ensuring that you have the capacity to remain whole. By refusing to engage in drama, refusing to justify your boundaries, and refusing to absorb the dysfunction of others, you gain a sense of internal stability that you have never known before. This is what it means to be sovereign. It is the realization that your primary responsibility is to your own soul, not to the emotional maintenance of the people who have been draining you. You have spent a lifetime ensuring everyone else was okay. It is time to be the one person you finally take care of. When you stop apologizing for your own existence, you reclaim the power to direct your life exactly where it needs to go. When you reach the stage of conscious choice, your internal world transforms into a fortress that is virtually impossible to infiltrate. You have seen every trick, every gaslighting tactic, and every manipulation game, and you now recognize the blueprint before the first move is even made. You no longer need to investigate or wonder if someone is acting in bad faith, because your intuition, once ignored and stifled, now acts like a high-speed alert system. You spot the red flags in the first 5 minutes of a conversation. And instead of engaging or trying to understand their perspective, you simply acknowledge the reality and step back. You have moved past the need for retaliation or revenge. Holding a grudge requires an investment of emotional energy that you are no longer willing to waste on people who don't matter. You don't need them to pay for what they did, and you don't need to win the argument. You simply remove them from your life with the clinical precision of a surgeon. Your presence naturally begins to act as a living filter for the people you allow into your inner circle. There is something profoundly uncomfortable about your new clarity for those who thrive on inauthentic or parasitic relationships. Manipulators and energy vampires cannot stand being around you anymore because they realize they no longer have access to the version of you that absorbed their chaos. They feel exposed, unmasked, and unable to feed, so they eventually drift away toward easier, less conscious targets. Conversely, people who are genuinely authentic, healthy, and grounded are finally drawn to you. They feel safe in your orbit for the first time because you are no longer projecting false expectations onto them or draining yourself to accommodate them. You have become a stable, immovable point in a chaotic world, and that stability acts as a magnet for people who actually value real, honest connection. This evolution is fundamentally about the survival of your own spirit, which is why the shift matters more than anything else you will ever undertake. You have spent your entire life operating under the false, exhausting premise that you have to keep others warm by setting yourself on fire. You were told that being an empath meant being a martyr, but you have finally realized the simple, brutal truth. You cannot pour from an empty cup. Every second you spent trying to heal someone who didn't want to be healed was a second stolen from your own growth. By hitting this breaking point, you are fundamentally exiting the role of the unconscious slave, a person reacting to every emotional gust of wind, and stepping into the role of the conscious director of your own reality. This is not a loss of humanity. It is the ultimate reclamation of your own power. You are not becoming cold. You are becoming intentional. You are finally deciding that your peace, your time, and your energy are the most valuable assets you own, and you are no longer handing them out for free to anyone who happens to be standing nearby. When you look in the mirror now, you don't see someone who is breaking down or falling apart. You see someone who is finally, painfully, and beautifully waking up. You are shedding the heavy, suffocating skin of your past conditioning and stepping into a life where you choose who gets your love, who gets your time, and who gets your energy. You have earned this freedom, and it is the most sacred gift you could ever give to yourself.